fucking great dodge. Well done, nice one. It's amazing that a mod turned standalone could get such a cult following. And no, I'm not looking at you, Daisy, or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. I'm talking about actual story games, not the choose-your-own story structure that Battle Royales take. Especially when that story, 99% of the time, consists of looting and inventory management for 30 minutes before probably getting your head sniped by a ghost from miles away. I'm talking about games that actually try and tell a narrative, like Cry of Fear. Although you may find yourself confused throughout proceedings, and may have to look some stuff up at times once you've finished, as the story can fail to make things clear. Considering I'm talking about a game with nearly 25,000 reviews on Steam and holding up at 85% positive, I can tell that Cry of Fear has a massive fanbase. I could even look at the Wasteland, which is my comment section, and that they were comparing it to Silent Hill. So why, Callum, do you think you have mixed feelings on this one then? Surely it's a classic for someone like yourself. It ticks all the right boxes. It's no monetization, despite being a free game. Remember those days where you could play a game in peace without the game trying to sell you gun skins with fairy glitter or extra rare diamonds to use for your characters for jazzle? It strives to be narrative driven and breaks the boundaries of the game engine it was made on, and of course, as an edgy teenager that surely everyone can relate to.
I've always liked you, Sophie.
Oh, Simon, I don't know what to say. I always liked you too, but not in that way. I always thought that you were just a friend, nothing more. I'm sorry.
After playing the damn thing, I'm not even particularly sure if I agree with the floods of positive reviews. Maybe even making this will enlighten me on how I feel after all. In a deep, dark Swedish city, which I can only assume is based around 2012, the date of the mod initially released, as I cannot find anything regarding the time this was actually based in. Anyway, it has Simon fighting his way through horrors and numerous different types of threatening enemies as he tries to find his way home in the night. Not very much is known or learned about his backstory, but he doesn't waste any time telling us how lonely, shit, and bitter he's feeling.
I've always felt alone. My whole life. For as long as I can remember.
So, straight off the bat you can tell that there's not going to be too many fun and games in this one. The thing is, this already leads into my first problem. Simon doesn't really say too much, and even then it's a coin flip of whether or not it's voice acted.
Damn it! What was that? Hallucinations? Am I going insane? Shit.
I wonder who that sick doctor is. He must have done something to me, so I wasn't paying attention. He's wearing a gas mask, and I'm not. And I'm not sure whether or not you've got attached to too many silent protagonists, but it made it really difficult to actually get attached to the dude. Granted, he does get a few good scenes where he actually develops his character, but there's only around 2 that I can remember from a whole 20 hours of actual gameplay. Speaking of character development, I can't say there's much of it throughout the whole game, considering there's only 3 characters, including Simon. And you know, I'm sure there's been some games that have done it well, but this one hardly goes out of his way to let you know how their characters feel and act, or why they like they are. So if you're expecting to be talking to a whole load of different people with different quips and personalities, then this is not the game for it. In fact, there's characters even more poorly understood, with many of their reactions and actions confusing me. In the opening scene, Simon is pinned against the wall in a car crash trying to help out an old man. The game kind of just says fuck you and doesn't really even tell you what the old man was doing there or why he was injured. And why were they both out at night? Who knows? Nevertheless, it was initially presented in a way which made me think it was framed. but we never hear anything from the old man afterwards, so he probably just fucked off on his merry way, and despite being involved in a life-threatening car crash where a teenager was pinned up against the wall, we then proceed to play through a typical Cry of Darkness level, where it's mostly pitch black and takes no liberties in really ramping it up straight away, like your girlfriend after watching 50 Shades of Grey. Well, anyway, there's a decent section where you take pictures through the level, but only by the aid of some illuminated crosses that you have to find and take a snap of before proceeding to the cheapest of the attempted jump scares. Considering that this was created off the Half-Life engine, we pretty much know what to expect in terms of feels and controls. There is a handy system where you can dual-wield different weapons and utilities, and it actually becomes quite useful straight from the bat. And then there are iron sights. I just found them pretty awful to use. At first I was trying to hold down the aim, but in fact it stopped Simon from being capable of shooting, possibly because he's trying to aim so hard he's forgetting to shoot and he actually poops. But in the end, your shooting from the hip is actually just as accurate and feels quite a lot better in the midst of being poked in the ass by a spikehead baby. If you're even half familiar with the Half-Life engine, it'd be easy to imagine the graphics in this one too. In which I mean, don't look at the environment too hard, you might uncover some piss-poor textures that might as well have just been replaced by an ass. On the upside, I've seen water so bad it looks like a big fluffy blanket with a cartoon water graphics been thrown over the ocean, but in this, I can give it a little credit. And the guns don't look too bad either. So much so, in fact, I couldn't help feeling like they were just a bit more high-res than everything else, therefore making them stick out just a little bit. Oh, go through the bloody wall, there we go. There's something in... Yeah, there might be something in the ceiling. He's holding a gun, better take it with me. You sure that was the safest thing to do? Just get it out of his hand like that? He's really weirdly, like, low res. And... oh, I was going to say, the reticle turned red, but it didn't. The gun's weirdly high res. Other than that, all I can say is that it's mostly serviceable, but also a hodgepodge of high and low res textures. Check out the barrel with such clear writing on it. And then some random poster on a bus that's barely readable. In terms of lighting, I was also disappointed, mostly because half of the game's environments are actually just pitch black to hide the fact that it's all monotonous underground passageways that just all look the same. I found that when I'd take a slight step in either direction, textures would weird out and just turn black, constantly making me think a table-shaped black hole had appeared and was about to mercilessly drag me into nothingness. And there's also a mechanic where you can switch your phone light on and leave it hanging on your belt. Well, I presume it's your belt, leaving a dim, omnidirectional light source. Thing is, whenever I'd do this, Simon would actually just wear a bloody baseball hat too low, as it would basically obscure most of his vision, as I could only see things at about waist high, even when getting 2 inches away of the bloody thing I was trying to see. Regarding the environments, with the half that you actually get to see, or that aren't just sewers or tunnels, it's fairly well done. The forest level looks fine. Except for the shitty indestructible twigs that only purpose is to confine you and stick the middle finger up at you as they stop you in your tracks during a chase sequence before the game is thinking, I'm straying too far. Well, how am I supposed to know that going left means I'm encroaching on the edge of the map? Everything looks the same because it's a fucking forest. They do put lanterns up to give you a general direction, but they would only be helpful if I had an assistant like they do in rally racing to tell me where the next one was.
Well, let's again, Andy. 4 right, 3 left, 2 right, 3 left, 3 left, 2 right, 1 left, 2 right, 2 left. Andy, quick 4 right down there, 2 left, Andy. Quick 4 right, 100. Quick 4 right, 100. 4 right, 100. 1 right, 60. 3 left and 5 right tight. 3 left, 5 right tight. 40. 5 left tight. 5 right, 40 tight. 5 left tight. 5 left tight. 5 left tight. 60. 1 left. That's it. 60, 1 left, 80, 1 right and 4 left. 1 left, 80, 1 right and 4 left.
And because you spend so much time in the dark or in underground tunnels or sewers, the areas with actual light feel fairly jarring and do offer a nice little respite. and you'll quickly start finding out the differences between door states. The door won't budge, is jammed, blocked, locked, something is on the other side. Keys can be a hassle too, with the half-obligatory unlockable doors being either unlocked upon interaction, or having to go through to your inventory and then choose use on every locked door. One last thing before we move away from focusing on the levels, I would just like to say that unless you're Mirror's Edge, and even then it's hard to get used to, don't put inch-perfect parkour puzzles in your first-person shooter, especially with hitboxes like in Cry Fear. Putting this shit in your game, and stamina bar that depletes whenever you jump, is worse than doing snow angels, except the snow is replaced with shit. As we take a whole U-turn, I would actually say that the music and audio is really well done. Even the voice acting is serviceable, with some awkward line delivery here and there, or just suddenly none at all. Although, I missed out on most of the dialogue that I'm sure the voice actors would have put a lot of time into, purely because the audio was just a little bit unbalanced, and it was drowned out by everything else other than the voices. And the music is solid as well. Even the absence of it is used to good effect. Especially in the boat scene, it was timed really well to give me just a feeling of respite. Unlike Half-Life, none of the weapons are actually anything interesting, not even in the world of guns. And knowing that there's just such a cool range of guns in Half-Life, it's kinda like having your own personal gourmet chef, but all you ask for is alphabetic spaghetti on a plate of microwave chips, or fries if you're American, or
薯条，薯条，薯条，薯薯薯薯薯薯薯条。
if you're Chinese. There were multiple points in the story where I was expected to die or get mortally injured at least once, so I can actually deal with what I weren't expecting the first time around. I call them not trial and error, but error and luck combat encounters. And during the naught to chainsaw encounters, the only reason why the chainsaw was even remotely worrying was because it was a one-hit kill, which the whole concept of one-hit kills on Simon feels a bit cheap, but usually it's only encountered when you'd face a boss, or a train decides to go on a murderous rampage and swiftly proceeds to chase you down like an angry neighbour with a baseball bat because you're on their lawn. This adds extra insult to injury when the train literally stops a few yards away once it's realised it's not able to hit you, because you managed to get lucky with the clunky platforming mechanics. Whilst in melee combat, it's mostly governed by managing your stamina and rhythmically attacking then dodging, and rinse repeat. It doesn't help that Simon has the stamina of an overweight 12-year-old. The AI is very basic. It sees and it runs. You cross the line and you die. You slip back into your hidey hole and they just stand there blankly. It seems as if some things weren't considered with the environmental layout and the capabilities of the AI. Surely, even if you're a mindless zombie creature, you may want to stand back when something starts slicing at your dick. The boss fights are complete trash. It's like they were added to tick a box to say, ooh, remember bosses? A concept that's been in games since forever? Well, we have these because reasons. Don't worry if they're dog shit, they're bosses, which means they must be good. There was no need for any of the bosses in the game apart from maybe the carcass and the final boss, but it's only to do with story stuff, and even then it's all executed poorly. And they really just existed to waste my ammo and make me hate my life, as I scrap for the smallest indication that there's something salvageable, which is usually aided by it glowing red, even acting as a beacon in pitch black areas sometimes. But even then I had troubles missing stuff and what the game deemed worthy of highlighting and what not to. Only in this game have I ever been confused about picking up something like a mug, just because it had the same shade of red that all pickups do. I wouldn't be surprised if this was made as a campaign to raise awareness for depression, although without knowing Simon's backstory it was really difficult for me to emphasise, and we learn a few things throughout the story of course, but we'll get to the story spoiler stuff later on in the video. The game really tries to jump scare you, but in the end it was more like someone wearing a party hat frantically blowing on their party horn. The attempted jump scares didn't really have any effect on me at all, and I can't really put my finger on why. Maybe it's the funky animations. But the game lost any of its horror credibility after the first hour or two. There were some neat moments that I like in horror games that were unscripted and that would give you the creeps. And there was even one time where I had to fight a bookhead monster and it would disappear without me realising, leaving me to follow it into the dark. Now, those moments are kinda cool. There were a few beats on the drum that fell on deaf ears, like when I noticed some newspaper glued to an upturned table. Oh my, that looks silly, I said to myself. I hope that wasn't on purpose, as that'd be quite a lame way of showing that the environment is becoming nonsensical in Simon's psyche. Why not show us a shimmering form of Simon's parents, or show ghostly figures running across the apartment? Even a few chairs stacked in a nonsensical way would do the trick. But newspapers on a table? It more so just looked like something that was overlooked by the developers when they were playtesting. In terms of the pacing of the story, it's mostly consisted of seeing a scripted cutscene, then getting assigned a task, fighting your way through until you complete that, then see another little cutscene where people say things that don't really make any contribution to the actual story. There really isn't much to say in the lead up to the spoilery part, I guess, but what I can say is that the cutscenes were a nice respite, and were mostly serviceable in terms of choreography, except for the shitty dodge at the first boss fight. It also grades you at the very end, like you've just handed in some coursework, except according to the game, my coursework was kinda shitty because it gave me a D. It listed out all the things I had achieved without any indication on how I could improve, whether or not it was bad or whether or not it was good. I had no clue. And now's the part for story spoilers. So, if you want to avoid those, just skip to here. The car crash that involved Simon leaves him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Alongside his troubled past that we don't really know about, this throws him into a deep spiral of depression. Dr. Purnell is assigned to Simon in order to alleviate his mental instability. He tells Simon that medication alone will not help, and he suggests writing a book about how he feels. As far as I can tell, this is what actually kickstarts the game and explains why zombies are running around in Scandinavia, and that's because the actual events of the game are the events of the book that Simon is writing. Well, except there may be some magic voodoo shit going on, as there's an alternate story unlocked after finishing the game, which features Dr. Purnell and his struggle to try and destroy Simon's evil book that is his nightmare. Well, back to the actual plausible storyline. Sora, I believe that's how you say it anyway, is the first boss of the game, and is defeated by just targeting the weak spot on his back. There's really not much to say about the actual fight, it's just a lot of strafing around and watching his AI be very stupid and kind of stand still occasionally. Shortly after, the Doctor is encountered for the first time, although his dialogue is confusing, but ultimately definitive, that he wants nothing to do with the main character.
Just leave me alone.
After a lot of padding consisting of a bunch of monsters being spread out between you and the second encounter, we once again meet the Doctor, which kind of solidifies him as the antagonist, as for some unexplained reason he's just cutting some dude's head off.
What the fuck are you doing?
He then flees promptly before the second boss fight, called Mace. A slightly more interesting premise of a blind, well, I couldn't really find anything that solidified that in the actual boss fight, but apparently he's also blind. But it just boils down to turning some valves and getting out the water before it shocks you. And hopefully the boss too. More padding happens before Simon meets the second character in Sophie.
Oh, hi, Simon.
Who was completely perplexing, as she knew nothing about the monsters that I'd been running from for nearly a dozen hours by then. The ensuing conversation swiftly concludes with her jumping off the edge of a rooftop and thus killing herself. I couldn't really bring myself to care too much, as she got a whole 5 minutes of development before dying, but there's no time wasted between her death and the third boss encounter, called the Carcass, which I'd assume would be a pain in the ass if it wasn't for the fight bugging out on me and thus allowing me to snipe it from the same spot, not getting hit in the process. Between this and the next story beat is probably my most hated part of the game, where you traverse through underground train tunnels, pitch black, featureless corridors, and also killer trains, along with a dead phone battery, which means the only light source that you have is a quickly diminishing source of flares, which are a fucking pain in the ass, by the way. If it wasn't for the fact that some flares I could actually just hold, which I assume is a bug because usually you would have to throw them and be like, hot, but he would just kind of hold them there for like a minute or so, which was very handy actually. A few more hours pass until things start picking up again, with one of the most revealing pieces of dialogue in the entire game up until this point. So now we have some solid information from someone outside of just Simon's twisted view. I was actually interested in finding out what came next until I died a few times due to one of the most annoying enemy types in the game. Don't ask why there's a crazy head spinning around in the room. The annoying enemy types and number would have been fine, but every time I died, you'd have to listen to the same 5 minutes of dialogue over and over again down that never-ending corridor until it allowed you to proceed. They quickly made one of the best dialogue pieces in the game one of the worst just because of the monotony of having to listen to it over and over. Further on down the line, you pick up a letter, which briefly summarizes Simon's life up until that point in a weird story within a story sort of manner. The letter reads, "Books have their own destinies, and also, books share their fates with their readers." I guess you learn something new every day. There's another monologue from Simon a few hours later.
I got hit by a car, woke up, and these things have been trying to kill me since. I mean, what is actually happening with me? Mom keeps telling me to get home, but why?
I can't. There's a big fucking gate in the way.
That's why I want you to come closer. I'll kill you.
How?
I need a gun.
You got a gun. The subway. The guy you shot. Remember?
I want a new gun.
Okay, not sure why you just can't get it yourself, dude. You got all the way to the mental hospital without dying, but I guess I'll do it if it's the only way. Why does this look like a choice? It's already clear that I need to pass, and he won't give me the key without me giving him the gun, so why would I refuse?
Now, give me the key.
Thank you, Simon. I'm glad you can trust. Now leave it down. Here.
You crazy bastard!
Well, now I at least have a reason to kill you. The Dr. Boss fight isn't bad, except for the one very debilitating problem.
There you are. You're dead. You're so fucking dead.
Either way, it's a cool little sequence where you're both popping out of cover and trying to potshot one another. The fight felt especially good whilst on low syringes, as outmaneuvering him was an interesting endeavour. Although, if you had enough syringes, you could just kind of stand there and heal over and over. Not long after the fight, there's a scene from this game that might stick with me forever. I'm not even sure why it's such a memorable moment. It's just really well done. It's a time to reflect on what you've been through and to speculate on how it's all going to end. It's a great moment. I'd recommend the game just for this little part alone. And thus, we find our way back home. Oh, wow, maybe it's not over just yet. And that's indeed the case, as there's one final boss fight, but just look how ridiculous this is. It's not only that there's a sheer amount of... but the movement is pretty painful too. You eventually kill what turns out to be Book Simon before returning back to your normal self once more, essentially stopping Simon from committing suicide.
I stopped myself from doing it. From committing suicide. But it didn't only leave me alive. It also left 2 police officers dead. I killed them.
Well, there may not be a way of getting out of that one. Doctors testify that Simon was having a psychosis, which grants him a more flexible life in a mental hospital compared to life imprisonment. Surprisingly enough, everything seems to look better for Simon despite this, and he finally finishes his book, happy ending and all. He even mentions that Sophie comes to visit, although apparently somewhat destabilizing for him, and most of all, he accepts being in a wheelchair. Surrounded by people who support him, Simon manages to continue on. Wait, what? Ending 4? There's multiple endings? Remember, books have their own destinies? Well, there's multiple endings here too. There are variations on whether or not you flee from the carcass fight, which I didn't even know you could do, and also giving the doctor his gun or not. If Simon flees from the carcass, his spite over Sophie for her shooting his attempt down at asking her out eats away at him, and he instead kills her before committing suicide. And yes, all these endings involve Simon committing suicide. If you don't give the doctor the gun, it signifies your distrust for him, so, of course, the most logical answer is to shoot him dead in his own apartment, and then Simon decides to off himself. There's also a survival mode which brings out its own ending, which I didn't really dabble in, and also a fully fledged co-op story, where 2 cops get stuck inside Simon's book, so they attempt to try and prevent the car crash what caused the creation of it. I might play that someday, but that moves me on to my conclusion. I have to applaud Cry of Fear on the story being unique and trying to have a message behind its content. So many games skip around the sensitive subjects, whilst Cry of Fear is happy to get its hands dirty in the nitty-gritty. Considering this is a free game, there is a substantial amount of content, and as for the majority of the aspects that annoyed me, they could be redeemed through some of the better sequences, even if it does leave a sour taste in the mouth.
Oh, you're gonna regret this. You're gonna regret this big time! Come back here! Come back!